Welcome to Innovator Coffee, a podcast that bridges the gap between people and the world of AI and innovation. Follow us to explore the top AI applications, ecosystem insights, and the innovation trends.
This cultivating conversation features Kyle, a seasoned serial entrepreneur with a rich engineering background, who shares his incredible journey and profound insights into the world of AI and innovation, reflecting on past tech waves and the current AI boom. Kyle offers insightful advice on rethinking troubleshooting in engineering, navigating early sales hurdle, from coding to leading, the power of connecting with competitors, and big budget versus lean operations. Enjoy.
Today, we're honored to have Kyle, who's a serious entrepreneur. How about you have a quick introduction, have yourself?
I started my career at Cisco. I had two different V1.0 products there. So they were kind of like startups within the bigger company. I loved it. Went to a startup after that, startup called Joost. I started my own after that. My first company I started was a company called Big Switch Networks. We were one of the really early companies in software-defined networking, and that was just a wild ride. We were acquired by Arista at the end of 2019. I went from there on to Google. It was my opportunity to get out of networking. I joined the Kubernetes team, so I was the senior director of product management for Kubernetes at Google. I loved it. So many really fascinating people, and I learned a lot, and that's actually where I came up with the idea for my latest startup, a startup called RunWhen, where we're building AI tools for operations.
Since you have a strong engineer background, you changed from your role, your journey from engineer to entrepreneurship to run a company. So what made you to do this switch? And can you share some experience and takeaways?
Lots of accidents. But I say this, I've actually now contributed 500,000 lines of code to our product now. So I'm kind of back in it. When I first graduated from undergrad, I started as a developer. It was a professional services company called Scient. We went public and we're the fastest growing revenue growth of any company on the NASDAQ at the time, which was amazing. The company was growing so fast that at one point, our clients in 2000 were just starting to ask about wireless. There were 5 of us that were getting together on Tuesday nights to teach ourselves at the time, like WAP and CHTML. This was all pre-iPhone, wireless and mobile apps. The other 4 happened to be busy on client projects, and I happened to have time. I was on the beach, so I got the right to start pulling together a team of other engineers that were on the beach to form the wireless practice for the company. And that was my transition from, I was an engineer, and then I was an engineering manager of 5 people. And then there were more and more people that kept coming on. The team grew up to almost 100 people. And I remember my boss would say, Kyle, you're like 24 years old, you're managing a team of 100 people. You're not doing a very good job of it. Let's be very clear. Unfortunately, we've interviewed 5 people and none of us can agree on your replacement. So you still have the job for a few more months until we can fill up the recruiting pipeline and get somebody who can do a half decent job, because you are really messing this up. And in the time I was doing these great with the COO, he said, hey, if you're going to manage this many people in the company, you're kind of embarrassing everybody. I started doing these weekly mentoring sessions with him so his view was like, so it's at least not totally embarrassing. And they never found a replacement. So I wound up actually managing this very large team until I wound up going to grad school after that. And then I kind of went from engineering management over into product management. But that was my graduation from coding myself, though I've kind of kept on coming back to it in personal projects and in between jobs. And then with RunWhen, obviously it's been a lot of coding on my side, because coding is a lot more fun now. You can get a lot more done in an hour than you could 20 years ago, a lot more. So long answer to a simple question.
From engineer to entrepreneurship, do you have some tips when some people are taking on the similar journey? What's the differences and what you learn from entrepreneurship role? What engineer background can shape your leadership? And also, what's the difference between an entrepreneur and an engineer?
Good question. I think I really love one of my current investors who I listen to most is a guy named Andrew Peterson, really brilliant investor. And he was the founder of Signal Sciences, and I just love getting his advice. So inevitably, if you're an entrepreneur and you're founding a company, by the time the company is 3 or 4 people, unless it's a consumer company, the founder's kind of interfacing with most of your customers. And if you like it or you don't like it, that doesn't really matter. You have to spend most of your time selling. You owe that to everybody else who's come on, because nobody else in that first group of 3, 4, 5 typically has the authenticity to both sell the product and to have the internal power to be able to turn the entire company on a dime. If you say, hey, we found our first customer, they're 45 degrees different from what we were building, and we're going to serve them anyways. So I do think that the huge difference between engineering and entrepreneurship is that you really do have to sign yourself up Unless you're starting with a commercial co-founder or you have some sort of other arrangement, but I think unless it's a co-founder, there are very few other arrangements that work. You just have to get ready when it's 3, 4, 5 people that you're a sales rep and you're cold calling and doing all of the things that really good sales reps hate to do. So I think that that's just a really important part of the differentiation. I have a lot of friends now. Hey, look, I'm almost 50. I have a lot of friends from business school that are consultants, still working at really, really big consulting firms. And clearly they could leave their consulting firm and do really well as an individual consultant, probably make more, but they're very aware that if they were to do that, 30 to 40% of their time would be spent selling new consulting projects rather than just continuing doing the consulting work that they love. And I don't blame them. They say, I want to spend my time doing great projects, not selling projects. I think people feel like, when people say, well, so you started your company, do you love being your own boss? And I'm like, how many people I work for?
I noticed when you mentioned you were an engineer who really liked coding, right? And then you moved to the entrepreneur, you need to build up all of your sales skills, right? What helped you to build up your sales skills? You have some experience you can share?
I had this great exercise that actually, at first it was actually our PR consultant, actually Amber from Big Switch. And she had me do this exercise first with press. And I'm totally convinced that it was actually the most successful sales exercise for people who don't come from a sales background. She had me write a series of points that I wanted to make on the press side. And I think the corollary on the sales side is write a series of questions. So I think the most important thing about sales is asking lots of very, very, very good questions. Much more important than presentation, much more important than being friendly, and like asking lots of good questions and good project management, or at least in the large enterprise sales stuff that I do, those are the important skills. And now more and more, I feel like I'm doing well when I have a little stack of note cards and I have these questions. And I remember Amber's voice in my head so well. She said, every time you make a point or ask a question, you can take a card out of your hand and you can put it down on the table. And if at the end of the meeting you have any cards in your hand, then you just failed your team. And the first few times I did it, and I would end this meeting with a stack of cards in my hand, I'm like, man, I've failed all these people that I work with. I've failed them. And they were counting on me to ask these questions. And I didn't get through them, because it was socially awkward, or I wanted to make friends or be nice or have rapport. And it was for me only this voice inside my head, it's like her voice, like, if you don't get these cards out of your hand, you failed the team. It for me forces me into doing these things that are a little more socially awkward, at least for me, of peppering somebody with questions, which you have to do with sales, and like making sure that you're asking lots of questions about, so what exactly do you do? So what exactly is your role in this decision? That's a really weird, awkward question to ask. But if you don't know it very early on, then you waste gigantic amounts of time. So like, if we do this, will you buy it? So if we do this, will you buy it for $150,000? Can we talk about price? All these really awkward questions that if I didn't do this exercise, I would just never ask and waste huge amounts of time. And when I've forgotten to do this exercise, I waste huge amounts of time.
That's a good exercise. Sounds like first you need to think through what kind of question you want to ask. And then second one is think beyond yourself. Try to think the team. It will help you to get all those powerful to talk through, right? And then the next will be the practice and practice.
Do you mean that like you just sitting at the office and pretend to ask and from time to time? Or what do you mean by practice?
I found for me, sales, the first and second meeting, they're just so, doing the job well is just so socially awkward. The only way to practice is to do lots of them, and lots of like cold emails, cold reach out over LinkedIn. Will you meet with me? Please, will you meet with me? Hey, just like begging people for meetings. It's sheerly a volume thing. I even find in my current business, we're experimenting around with a bunch of different approaches. We just found this amazing tool called SageTap. We just went from having 1 or 2 good, high quality new customer meetings per week to now having like 5 to 7, more than half of it thanks to this tool. I mean, I feel like I've been doing this for a while, and I can even tell just how much better I've gotten in the month that we're on this tool, just because the difference between pitching to new customers 5 and 7 times a week is really different from pitching once or twice a week.
For early sales, typically it's hard to tell the client's intention. One is they always ask for your portfolio. Let's say, do you have experience? If we are running startup, we are just start, right? So we don't have a lot of portfolio to show. So how can you handle this problem when you do your early sales?
Are you familiar with the book by Jeffrey Moore called Crossing the Chasm? You heard this, it's a great book. I actually gave talks on this book. I think I've bought lifetime probably 50 or 60 copies of this book that I've given away to people that I've worked with, to friends. I used to give talks on this book back at Google. Like, I'm a huge believer. So the Jeffrey Moore book, they talk about 4 buying personas for enterprise sales. One is the visionary. And the visionary desperately wants to be the first person in the world to use your product. They have something in mind that's very different from what you built it for. They're terrible customers. They never have any budget because nobody trusts them with any budget because they're a little crazy. They usually don't do great work for the organizations that they're in, but they're a very, very necessary first step because they're truly internally driven by, they want to be the first person in the world. And then there's the early adopters who generally always have a friend who's a visionary. And I've seen this pattern show up over and over and over. It's eerie how often it shows up. And the early adopters are the most important people for a new enterprise business because for them, their next promotion or their career success is all about them being the first in their geography or in their industry to use your product, but not the first in the world. And it's a subtle distinction between them and visionaries. Because the visionaries, and we got a few for RunWhen, and man, they ask us for some weird shit. It is very, very difficult because we have to say no, because nobody else in the world wants to do well. Like, we've got the three of them that are going in crazy directions. But without them, we never would have gotten to the early adopters who never wanted to be first. But the early adopters are the ones who make the product. They are very aware, they're very politically aware within their organizations. They know what can sell internally. They know what will work because they're ambitious people themselves and you're part of their career journey. The book goes on and on, but at least for V1.0 products, those are the two personalities that I spend a lot of time focused on. And I feel like I have a lot of friends that are in those two personalities because that's kind of where I've spent like 20 years of my career.
Can you give us a quick overview regarding how traditional troubleshooting works in the engineering work process and why it's very important?
A good engineering organization on a good day, coding-wise, you're maybe writing 200, 300 lines of new code. If you actually just are really honest with yourself and look at PRs, 200 to 300 lines of code, that's a pretty good day for a software developer. If you actually look at the engineering organization as a whole, because those people generally only about 60 to 70% of the engineering organization as a whole, figure on average across your engineering organization, you're maybe getting 120, maybe 150 lines of new code every day per person. And that's cranking. So let's call it 100 lines. That's like a page and a half. If you would write a page and a half long email, it takes 20 minutes. Where does the rest of the day go? Clearly it's not spent typing code. Just typing 100 lines of an email, if that's 20 minutes, where does the rest of the day go? And that was the thing that always fascinated me. Like, okay, wow. There's this great paper called Today Was a Good Day. It's a wonderful study. Andre Zimmerman and a team, it was a combination team from Microsoft Research and University of Zurich, surveyed 5,000 software developers at Microsoft. And they have these amazing studies of they built monitoring software on their laptops. And they have these amazing studies. So for our best engineers, where does the time actually go? And it doesn't go into meetings. That's a complete myth. It's not like all the rest of the time is spent in meetings. There's just a huge amount of work that goes on in an engineering organization that's not actually fingers on keyboard typing new code. We use troubleshooting as a really, 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 really big umbrella. If somebody's working on a piece of code and that piece of code isn't doing what they wanted it to do, somebody just got alerted that a piece of code they wrote a couple of days ago is not doing what they expected it to do in a test environment. Some people just got notified that something that they wrote a month ago is really not doing what somebody else expected it to do from some other team because they've now adopted it. There's just a huge amount of this other stuff. And we couldn't think of a better word because the word other stuff, we're an other stuff company, just didn't stick. So troubleshooting was kind of like the best word that we could come up with to cover all of this time, this huge, gigantic, enormous amount of time that gets spent not actually typing new code.
Could you tell me the story why you founded the company based on AI engineering and what problem did you identify in the market in order to start this venture? And what are the North Stars of your product?
Big questions. When I was on the Kubernetes team, we had 10,000 customers at the time, and just watching our customers struggle with Kubernetes was like heartbreaking, right? Because all in, if you generally move a workload from VMs over to Kubernetes, you're going to save, rough rule of thumb, like about 30% in your compute, network, and storage costs, just between like the efficiency that the things bring. But we saw just over and over teams that were not saving anything because the operational overhead of what they were creating on Kube was so much higher compared to what they were used to on VMs. And so we'd have teams come back saying, this doesn't really work for us. We're spending a lot more in operational headcount than we were. And there was some amount of training and then some amount of bravado, which I never really liked about People felt like, well, if Google can run it, then like maybe are we not smart enough? And that always really bothered me a lot. I think a lot of the answer was that just lots of tiny little automated tools. And you could see these like little ecosystems of automated tools, and a lot of them became companies. So this huge ecosystem of tiny companies in the Kubernetes ecosystem. So some of the original idea was like, hey, gosh, if we could aggregate a very, very, very large number of tools that are really the size of a small script, that's it, and make it really easy for anybody in an organization to find that small script, anybody in the organization to run that small script. As engineers, you're kind of used to everybody on the team has a home directory with a handful of scripts, and your top engineers tend to have really valuable home directories. Could we do this type of thing at industry scale? And it wasn't just about Kubernetes. At Big Switch, I just watched customers really struggle to adopt software-defined networking. And I kept thinking, if at industry scale, if we could just share these little bits of automation all around, we could help any organization adopt new technologies much faster. And I felt like there would be some real goodness in there. If we could just say, wow, it's really easy to adopt a new technology because getting it production ready for us is no longer a 1-year-long journey. 3 months and lots of automated tools that everybody can find. And a lot of those automated tools were in fact written by some other organization. So that was the original genesis of the idea. AI for us, we started pre-LLMs. So we started with this idea of like a marketplace almost of publishing automation and then users using automation. AI played 2 gigantic roles. It made the matching process of matching somebody who needs automation with automation that exists in their environment, effectively think of it like a recommendation engine, massively more valuable. This was a recommendation engine that I don't think pre-AI. I remember I went back to one investor presentation, it was like, we call it engineering assistant, but think about the recommendation engine, that's like, we're going to build that in 2027, because that's when we think that maybe we'll have enough data to be able to build this. Literally, after the OpenAI API came out, my wife and kids were gone for like a weekend. And on Sunday, we had the 2027 roadmap item. It was a total game changer. It also let us do this really pretty amazing thing that I'm very, very proud of, where we have sort of these engineering assistants that are running almost semi-autonomously in your infrastructure and picking bits of automation that they think need to be running it, looking at the output, and then based on that output, plus everything else that they know, grabbing automation that needs to be run. So they really do start to feel more and more like an extra member of your team. And that was a big wow. With less than natural language, we don't actually use the natural language. They're not like chatbots. We're doing called agentic planning with LLMs from the first week that the OpenAI API was released. And it was a game changer. I mean, it was just, it totally changed our vision of the product. We're like, wait, it's called agentic planning now. It wasn't really called anything then. Nobody really knew what it could be. But it turned this thing into a product that I never could have envisioned before that weekend.
It sounds like for your product, you actually solve bigger problem. It's not like the traditional easy troubleshooting we're talking about, right? In order to solve this bigger problem, how do you narrow down at the very first and try to deliver the first MVP product and help to prioritize the biggest problem within this big chunk?
I would say that's where taking a very commercial look at the thing, this is where we switch gears to me from, I think that the problem that we're facing, that we're trying to solve is a big like enterprise, like industry level, enterprise is the wrong word, and just like professional. It's a problem for our profession in general. If we could find some way to spend a lot more time typing out new code and a lot less time on this other stuff, I think we'd just have a win for our profession. Go down a couple levels of altitude and there's, okay, so, we don't want to make this an academic research project. So I think the path from here to there was, okay, so how do we make a company around it? At least in the era where RunWhen kind of started and our kind of formative, you remember our formative years were like every team around us was getting layoffs. That was like everybody that we looked at. Hey, we have this cool thing. Do you want to be a design partner? Yeah, that'd be great. But I just laid off 30% of my team last week and I might be next. We had 10 design partners in a row where the individual that we were working with actually got laid off. So the idea of developer productivity was like lowest on the list for anybody that we talked to. The commercial problem that I think companies that in our like formative era were most interested in was reliability. And specifically, we're talking about like large financial institutions, telecommunications service providers, like the kind of company where you say, what's your cost if you're down for a minute? And everybody in the organization is, oh, $16.2 million. Oh, okay. Like very, very large SaaS company, like you ask somebody at Shopify, cluster you down for a minute. Oh, okay. Like everybody just in the hallway talks about it. That was the area that we found that we could tie to downtime and MTTR. And if we could have AI running around trying to troubleshoot and trying to debug systems, then we could reduce downtime for these organizations where their downtime is just so expensive. So that's where going from, hey, I think this is a problem for our profession, to here is a tiny little starting point, because this tiny little starting point, just there's so many dollars on the line that if you can improve it a little bit and prove that you improved it a little bit, then you've created so much economic value that it's okay to ask for some percentage of that as revenue.
And then talking about the commercial considerations, what is your revenue model? People doing stuff for AI, like do subscriptions, they do charge by tokens and all others. So what is your revenue model, and what do you suggest that the AI startup companies can do for their revenue model?
We're just about to switch our website out because we found actually we now actually charge by time saved. Our system spits out, hey, here's how much human engineering time we think we've saved by running these automated tasks that we have. And I think it brings up a much bigger point. I wish people in our industry would talk about this more. I think there's this really interesting point that I generally don't think, if you can figure out the right metric to charge on that's really closely aligned with the KPIs for the person who's buying your product, that they need to deliver to that they're personally responsible for their organization. If you can get really close to their KPIs and that's how you charge, I found enterprises in general aren't so price sensitive, because as long as you're charging a percentage of what is their metric for success, that's okay. I think it's when your charging metric starts to stray really far from their personal responsibilities, that's when there's more grinding of the gears around enterprise pricing. Time saved for us is wonderful. On SRE teams, time saved is MTTR. This is like, we just saved 2 hours and there's some chance that 2 hours was in the middle of an incident. So we can very, very clearly say, hey, look, if you're not saving any time with us, then we shouldn't charge you. But if you're saving a ton of time with us, this isn't a productivity question. This is probably a downtime question. And then when we're being used in non-prod, then it's a straight developer productivity. Okay, here's how many developer hours that we've generally saved. And then the biggest place, at least in current form, we generally, our largest competition right now, interestingly enough, is actually outsourced offshore ops teams. And so at $1 per, like some amount per time saved, it's either us or some integrator that says, hey, we'll do all your production operations, we'll handle all of your alerts and tickets and in prod for you for X number of dollars per hour. And then we can say, well, we'll charge 1/10 of X numbers of dollars per hour. So we're very directly comparable there to the obvious other option.
Do you think this charging model will still sustainable?
It's a great question. Right now, my hope is that we'll to some extent cannibalize ourselves by making our own automated tasks like more and more and more efficient. So in shorter amounts of time, basically save more time, but a lot of that time starts going away out of the system anyways. My hope, though, is that is dramatically offset by people expanding their use of RunWhen. So instead of saving time across one DevOps person on one engineering team, now we're saving time across 6 people on 6 platform engineers, DevOps, SREs on one team, to suddenly now we're saving time across 4 different teams. So my hope is that, at least I'm kind of confident from what we're seeing so far, that our user expansion more than makes up for the cannibalization of teams just simply getting more efficient as they use our tool.
At the beginning, this charging model is quite attractive, right? When people start to use it, they see the result, they're happy about your product, and then they will engage with your team, which is super good.
What happens years from now, I don't know. Part of the startup journey, we might have to change. I don't know.
This is your second company, right? What are the lessons learned you got from the first one and adopt to the second one?
First one, partly because of the industry, like networking, you can't build a product with 3 people. It took us a 45-person engineering team working for almost 4 years to ship the V1.0 of the product. So we raised a lot of money, like a lot. And it was kind of like a James Cameron style movie, like the Avatar. It was like a big budget film. We're hiring amazing, really expensive, really amazing engineers. We had more Cisco distinguished engineers and VMware principal engineers that you could shake a stick at, the first 30 people. It was a really amazing, gifted team, but we raised a ton of money. And I think with RunWhen, I wanted to do it different. I wanted to make it a little bit more like a Sundance Film Festival film shot on an iPhone. We got into we're in our first Fortune 50 in production with one front-end engineer, and like it's like this tiny little group. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to go into too specific metrics, but very, very different style. I now see the pros and cons of both. The wonderful thing about raising a ton of money is that you can hire an amazing management team, kind of managing very, very fast. The downside was that you really have to hit your revenue ramp because you have investors that are expecting, they wrote big checks, and we're running 3 months late is very not good, very not good. And I was always very jealous. Also, obviously, you own very little as the entrepreneur, right? Because you raise so much money so early. So I was always very jealous of friends that had started companies on a shoestring and that could sell their company to a lot of different people for very small amounts and still make a ton themselves and make a ton for all their employees. And they didn't have these massively powerful VCs on their back every month. Now I see the other side. It would be nice to raise a lot of money and have a big team again. And it might come at the cost of having a lot of VCs like on my back. The grass is always greener.
I wonder, during your startup journeys, what are the biggest challenges or hurdles you face so far? And could you share a little bit about how you address that?
I think, at least in the stuff I do, it's always product market fit. And that's not only in startups. Actually, every big company, at Google, I thought product market fit was really, really hard for the new products that I was working on. At Cisco, product market fit. I really like products that are in a new category, which by definition means product market fit is hard and it's grinding and you get tons of no's, and there are quarters and quarters where you just go down the wrong path and you don't realize it for a year later. I think it's intellectually difficult. It's emotionally difficult because you get a lot of no's and you get a lot of like, yeah, you know everything you said? I don't get any of it. And if I did, I don't think it's that important. So why don't we end the meeting now? That's like a very regular thing in this like, new category business. And then it's a huge leadership challenge because you get a lot of people come onto the company to build X, and then you discover that we're having trouble finding any product market fit in X. So let's redefine it to Y. And then you get a lot of people saying, but I joined because I really wanted to build X. Do you have data to show? Or is this a capricious? You woke up a different side of the bed on Sunday? Because I want to build X and now you're telling me that you're going to go build Y. So it's a huge emotional challenge. It's a huge intellectual challenge. It's a huge leadership challenge. And it's kind of become the only thing I know how to do.
This one reminded me regarding one of my friends, right? He's building a company, and for his original thinking, it's kind of like somehow after they worked for a few years, they found out the ceiling is not that high. And then they try to find the second curve. Just like we mentioned, right? Sounds like you had several, or at least some pivot in the past to make things work. What's your suggestion to this friend? How can they manage their resource to make things work at this point?
It's a great question because I think a lot of people have advice about how do you start the pivot? How do you know when it's time to pivot? Very kind of strategy advice. I would just have to give a huge shout out to my team at RunWhen because I actually think that the strategy pivot part is really, really easy. I think it happens naturally. I think you just get fatigued from getting a lot of no's that you start trying something different. And then you get super irrationally excited when somebody gives you a partial yes. So you kind of like Darwinian your way into it, at least in enterprise. The huge issue that I think people don't talk about is the people that you've surrounded yourself with are either dead set on building X and have a really, really, really hard time moving that vision around and take a lot of conversations and a lot of that you want to build Y, but like we have to make it okay for all the people that still want to build X. Or you've surrounded yourself with people who say, hey, we're up for whatever. Let's just do it. Intensely, and I love that about RunWhen, intensely good-natured people who came on with the expectation of we're pivoting. Okay, like it's Tuesday, why don't we do that? So I think that camaraderie and the group of people that you surround yourself with and the reason that they joined, that's something that you can do a lot about. And that to me is kind of like the make it or break it when you have to pivot. And I think the mental model shouldn't be pivot once or pivot twice. The mental model should be 4, 5, or 6 times. And bring people in saying, hey, we're going to pivot a whole bunch of times. I don't know what we're going to build, and I guarantee it's going to be different after our 3rd pivot. Do you still want to come on and work with us? And if they say yes, fantastic.
Wow, so it's just try to select the right people with a growth mindset at the beginning. Wow.
I'm quite curious how you kind of find early founding team when you have a great idea.
It's always hard. I remember talking to actually Jay Chowdhury. So he's the founder of Zscaler. He's a serial entrepreneur. I think Zscaler was his 5th or 6th company, something like that, with a whole series of successful ones. This really interesting thing. He said, hey, Kyle, he's like, I asked him something about his management team. And he said, look, I have this big belief now. I never take more than 30% of the management team from my prior company into my next. I think unless you surround yourself by new people, the thinking gets stale. And generally he's been in slightly different industry niches as he's gone. So he's like, you really want experts in the new niche, not people that you were just comfortable working with before in your old niche. One of the core folks was the first engineer at Big Switch. And then a number of the others were people that I either met from Google, or they were friends of friends, or they were kind of more further afield. I think finding people, the growth mindset, I really, really love the way that you put it. I never really thought about it in those words, but I think I like the way you put it. If it's okay, I'm going to quote you on that a lot, because I think that's probably the most important thing. I think finding people who are in a stage of life where they have more to gain than to lose, that's really important. And that's different for every single person. But I found some people who were just amazing early startup folks. Like a big one is pre-kids. But then as soon as they had kids, like fixed expenses shot through the roof. Absolutely. The amount of other responsibilities, especially it's mostly financial stability, the ability to, hey, if this thing suddenly, if we can't make payroll for 2 months, is everything okay? No, wait, things are not going to be okay if you can't make payroll for 2 months. So I think that there's a lot, even for the exact same person at different phases in life. And then I have actually one other example where, okay, hey, the kids are now like in high school. I have enough financial stability that I desperately want to go back into doing a startup, because the period when I couldn't afford it from family reasons is now past. So even the exact same person, I think at different phases in life, some days they're just perfect for a founding team, and then at different phases of life, they're just other responsibilities that are just more important. So I think growth mindset and lining up with somebody's phase of life where they're like, somehow the moons have aligned, where financially and time and life and emotionally wise, it's all a good match. And the cohesiveness of the team. I generally try to, I think it's really good when you have at least a couple of people on the founding team that are friends. It helps with like the overall trust culture. So either they're friends with you or they're friends with each other, and it kind of all came on together. So everybody's like, well, hey, we got to work through the weekend, but if we weren't working, then like we'd probably all be hanging out anyways. That helps a lot.
Thank you.
I actually want to ask a little bit more about your product, because, like if you find out this is a great need, I bet a lot of other people find out it's a great need as well, right? So how do you differentiate your product with other competitors?
Well, not to give too much of a tale of woe, but our starting point was this Google version of this tool, and we had this competitor that had started a couple of years before us, they were productizing the Amazon version of this tool, and they were clearly a couple of years ahead of us, more than a couple. And the CEO found a really, really, really good guy. I made it a habit to try to reach out to him and talk once a quarter. And I was like, oh man, how are we going to catch up? We're both kind of racing, but we got a long ways to catch up. They get acquired by NVIDIA last summer. And there were 2 months where I was like, nobody's anywhere near us. We have this whole market to ourselves. This crazy Amazon team that we were competing with is now, they're being used for an internal use at NVIDIA. Champagne, we got this. And then 8 weeks later, this guy announces that he just got a $35 million seed round to get his started. And then 1 month later, another competitor raises a $22 million seed round. And 6 weeks after that, there is another $22 million seed round. The same company, they did 2 $22 million seed rounds, which is very odd. But anyway, so all of a sudden we went from, it was a great 6 weeks or so where it looked like we had no competition. So I think I'm probably not the only one out there with this idea. Interestingly enough, how do we differentiate ourselves? I think actually the first competitor that I mentioned had zero AI, because they were way before embracing AI at all in their product. We were early enough that when the OpenAI API came out, we kind of embraced it for this agentic planning piece of our product that was basically like a human part of human workflow bit beforehand, and it was magic. But still, all of the capabilities of the product are actually written in traditional code. And then the competitors that came after, they trust AI a lot more than I do, but they have the equivalent of their capability. A lot of their capabilities aren't just agentic planning. Their capabilities of how their product interacts with, in their case, observability systems is actually entirely driven. Think of it like observability queries that are entirely driven by LLMs. So they're like way, like drank the Kool-Aid on how deeply LLMs are doing it, integrated in. It lends itself, we're all solving the same problem, but we're solving it in very different ways. Ours is highly accurate, but takes a lot more human work to build up our library of tasks. And I think if we were having LLMs write those on the fly, sure, it could do 10,000 of them in the first hour, but a lot of them would be wrong and would fail for reasons that are hard to debug. And I don't totally see how we would make the system better. As an engineering process thing, I don't see how we would make the system better over time. Ours just takes a lot of blood, sweat, and tears up front, It takes a lot of blood, sweat, and tears over and over and over again, but every single day it's getting better. Sorry, it's a little bit abstract without going too deep into the technical architecture. I don't know if I'm doing a great job of explaining it, but I'm trying.
This is a great answer. I guess the reason you have the author community is try to help you in the best way at this moment, huh?
That's exactly it. I'm flattered. We're looking. You spend enough time looking at my product to know about that. So we have this library of automated tasks that are written for us by a community of authors who receive royalties from us when their automation gets run. So, hey, here are 32 ways to troubleshoot Kafka. Great. We have somebody who's been troubleshooting Kafka at massive scale for years, basically getting everything out of their head and into tasks that they say, hey, if you're new to Kafka, here are 32 scripts that you should have in your home directory because they make a huge difference. Same thing Postgres, same thing Redis, same thing, name them down the list. So yeah, we came up with this business idea of let's not just have us write it, let's have everybody contribute. And it's not open source for a thank you and a pat on the back. It's like open source because they actually make royalties from this. The market timing for this type of thing, there are a lot of people who can use this as a resume bullet point item. A little bit of money helps.
Since you're talking about this, what kind of characteristics or criteria you guys are looking for to join this community?
We used to think that anybody who was really interested in automation, this would be perfect, and we were a little bit wrong. And then we thought like anybody who's a really great software developer would be fantastic in this area, like a 10x software developer. For the community of our authors, the thing that matters by far the most is actually real world experience operating software. And not even a massive scale, but in organizations where uptime is really important, like a high operational discipline. Oddly enough, like the greatest coders and the worst coders that doesn't seem to matter because there's enough our troubleshooting scripts, they tend to be small. 150 lines of code is a lot. It's enough that ChatGPT can clean up pretty much anybody's code. It's the insight of saying, hey, I've seen Kafka fail 42 different ways, and here's what happened. Here's what you do next. That insight that only comes from operational experience, that turns out to be for us what matters a lot. It shows through so vividly in the code that our authors contribute.
So if some of our audience want to join your community, right, what's the best way to contact you then?
Hit me up on LinkedIn. We're still small enough that I get to meet everybody. We can actually cover the top 100 open source packages that run on top of Kubernetes very well in perpetuity and have a shot at the top 200. By covering the top 100 open source packages on top of Kubernetes, that represents about 72% of the Kubernetes CPUs worldwide. So that's most of the things that run on top of Kubernetes are actually the world's top 100 open source packages, which is kind of crazy, right? And then you add a couple of people going through different language frameworks and different observability tools.
You know that AI right now can do automations, right? As the time goes by, I believe the performance will be even more accurate. So will this environment impact your product or industry, or how do you perceive this?
So I think there are three things. I think writing new automation code on the fly is a little dangerous, right? I don't think that you would even have a senior developer. So I think that all of these tools for us help write the automation that I think should be at least reviewed to some extent, like kind of write all the automation up front and then use it when there's some incident. So we're really heavily internal to our team, posted on LinkedIn. Everybody on our team has infinite budget to try whatever AI coding tool they want. And then we take our favorites and we kind of turn those into some of our author-facing tools and author-facing best practices. So our authors are very heavy users of these tools now. It's made a huge difference. We've went from 3 to 4 automated tasks per month, 20 automated tasks per month, just by better AI tools. So the productivity there is just shot through the roof. I think when you actually look inside somebody's environment, there are 3 things that automation, at least for troubleshooting, really needs to know. It needs to have what expertise? It needs to have, hey, how do I troubleshoot a failing deployment on Kubernetes? Well, generally there are 12 things that you do, and if you've done all 12 of those, then the problem is probably outside the scope of Kubernetes. The problem still might be a network issue or an underlying storage issue, or there are a lot of other things, but if you tried these 12 things, then you could probably say there's still a problem, but you need something different from the Kube API to get to it. So there's like troubleshooting Kubernetes, or troubleshooting Postgres, or troubleshooting Kafka. There's this troubleshooting this thing in the abstract, right? And that's the automation scripts and knowing how to connect them and when to run them. Then there's what we call the where knowledge. Troubleshooting Redis cart that's attached to the cart service in the online boutique namespace that's running in Kubernetes cluster 42A64 in US West 1A. Where is this in the enterprise's infrastructure and how do you get there? It's a VM and it's here and you can SSH in, or in order to get to this VM, you have to go through this jump box and then in. It's a Kubernetes cluster. To get to it, you need to load this kube config to get into this Kubernetes cluster. So there's a lot of where knowledge. Hey, if the cart service is down, then you should check the Redis cart instance right next to it to see if that's also down, because that actually tells you a lot. So that's very specific to the enterprise, and there's no way that there's no OpenAI or DeepSeek or large model that has any of that knowledge whatsoever. So we call it knowledge, there's the where knowledge, and then fusing it together, we call the what next knowledge. So knowing current system state. Hey, cart service is down, we know that. We're trying to figure out something about the shipping service related to cart service, because maybe that's why shipping service is also down. Or no, they're totally independent. Oh, they're actually services in two totally different clusters. Oh wait, we're trying to troubleshoot shipping service in prod, and cart service in one of the dev ends is down. These two things have absolutely nothing to do with each other. Information about current state is the third piece of the puzzle. So there's the what knowledge in general, and that as large models get better, that's just going to keep on getting faster and cheaper. And I think there's zero economic moat for us, absolutely zero. There's not where knowledge of where the whole infrastructure is together, and then where now knowledge of exactly current state. So it's that second and third that for us, I think is still pretty big.
You mentioned initially you were thinking it will take a lot of time till 2027, you get your roadmap, right? And then after OpenAI starts to have all those functions and you guys get fast moving, right? So does it mean initially you try to have your own model and now you kind of to fully leverage all those APIs?
The thing that I had in mind wasn't even a fancy neural network model. I thought it would take us till 2027 before I could have enough data for a linear regression. That was the big vision of our first machine learning. For a lot of reasons, it took a lot of data because we have a lot of tiny niches that we would have to do. And I was like, all right, so we have give or take about 8,000 niches. So we need to run about 8,000 linear regressions. That was the original machine learning plan. And we're like, it'll take us till 2027 to get enough data to do that. Yeah, this is kind of like what we had in mind.
May I ask, who is your most admirable competitor and why?
I won't talk about the two current ones, but I want to say, because I just want to say a very specific note about the last one. This was Shoreline.io that got bought by NVIDIA. And the reason I admired them so much, Anurag Gupta, the founder, I think I'm not sharing anything out of school. He never shared it with me as a competitor, but he shared it with me after his company got bought and shared it with his board too. So his entire aspiration for the company, he has a special needs child. And he said, I desperately want to make a company that makes enough money so that I can turn around and start a foundation for my son. My career goal is that. And I realized that if I continue to use a VP of storage at Amazon, I won't have quite enough to be able to start a self-perpetuating foundation for medical research for my son. So that's why I left to start the company, and that's why I need this company to be a big company. And I was just blown away when he told me that story, and I'd heard it before from other people, and I just thought that was such a selfless, amazing, cool reason to start a company and to have the drive and the ambition to work every weekend. I mean, the guy's got an amazing work ethic to just drive through during the tough slogging. The timing in the industry was really, really, really rough. So I just admired, when the company, I just admired him. And I still admire him.
You also mentioned you want to have a sync-up meeting with them on a quarterly basis. How do you work with your competitors in a mutual benefit way?
First of all, I strongly recommend to everybody listening to your podcast, reach out to your top one or two competitors. If you're a founder or CEO, whatever, and say, hey, can we meet every quarter for a coffee or for just a quick phone call? Over and over, it made such a big difference. First of all, when it's a bunch of startups, there's always an incumbent in the mix somewhere. Even if they're not directly competitive, they will be. So sooner or later, there's going to be a really, really, really big company, and startups can always come together to do a lot of mutual work, whether it's marketing, positioning. Hey, why don't we get together 3 startups and let's all agree to say this to the Gartner analyst, because if we all agree on this and this big company is the only one that disagrees, they're going to look wrong. And there we'll all pump ourselves up in front of Gartner. Or let's coordinate on this conference and let's all try to show up at this conference so that we're driving enough traffic that our little group of startups matters. Hey, are we going to work on an industry standard or an industry de facto standard? Is there something that we can agree on that while we compete in many other ways, we're going to agree on this sort of even an API standard, or even just here are a handful of words that we agree to all use in our marketing, so that when an enterprise customer looks, if they only find one company in the space, they're like, eh. But if they find 2 or 3, they're like, okay, all right, let's take a harder look at these. So I think there's actually a lot to agree on at least in enterprise direct sales where I'm there, inevitably you hire aggressive sales teams that want to do the best thing, and they get in fights every once in a while, and the fights can be kind of nasty and kind of ugly, and being able to call the founder of the other company or the CEO of the other company or the whatever, something, just say, hey, look, let's not escalate this. This was a fight between two people for good reason. They have a lot of economics on the line. Like, let's not make this all that war in between our companies here, because that's just stupid. I've been a part of a couple of those, and I'm glad every single time. I think we've created a lot of value by doing that, where otherwise a lot of value could have gotten destroyed in a hurry. And I generally like them. I wound up in industries, I don't know, I kind of tend to, you're going through this, I'm going through this, and we cry on each other's shoulders sometimes.
You've been through different innovation waves, right? Like the cloud, and then now like AI, and also in the past, maybe something else. How do you see the difference between different waves on the innovation impact?
My wife just got me this wonderful card saying, how can I remember song lyrics from the 80s far more effectively than I can remember why I went into the kitchen in the first place? Waves, I would say, I first started coding in 99 when the consumer internet was still just showing up. I remember actually doing my first internship the day that Netscape went public. And so watching like that wave was, I think, interesting. And having a very front seat to like the TV over the internet wave, and then the software-defined networking wave, and now the AI wave. I think there are a small number of very lucky people that happen to have been doing it for a few years before the wave got really, really big. And sometimes those people surf their way into some absolutely amazing position in the industry. I think that was a good example. Clara Shih is a fantastic example. Joined as the head of AI for Salesforce 5 or 6 months before the OpenAI announcement. Maybe it was prescient, maybe it was luck, I don't know, but amazing. It's about catching the wave at just the right time. Series of OpenAI researchers that have spent their entire lives working on this. And now all of a sudden, after kind of thinking that their entire world was going to be academia, have any company willing to pay them whatever it takes to just show up one day a week. So I feel like there's a little bit of, hey, there's kind of this lucky group of, they've been working on it, toiling away in obscurity for a couple of years first, and then the wave suddenly hits, and some of them become very visible and some of them don't, whatever it is. I think there are a bunch of people that pivot their way onto the wave when it's clearly growing. Like I think with AI, I call that me. I never really worked in it. I'd done one prototype using Google Vertex AI a couple of years ago for my brother. But beyond that, I kind of had no authenticity in it at all before that first weekend when my wife and kids were out of town. And then there's the third, where there's this intense FOMO and this fear of missing out. I think especially in tech, it happens a little bit less in industries that are tech the closest, finance the second closest, and then a bunch of others have, hey, this is a gigantic career progression moment and I'm missing out on it. And I think sometimes that feeling is a little bit more overblown, because these waves it takes a little while to figure out actually where they'll create real economic value for people other than the amazingly lucky folks who caught the wave at just the right time. So I think that third group to me is always a very interesting one, because you see people either really feel awful about themselves for a long time about it, or I think the more rational ones, like staying in place in the ocean, and the wave, if it's going to be that as important as you think it is, it's going to wind up coming very, very, very close to you. And simply by having a lot of knowledge around your particular neck of the ocean, you're probably in a pretty good position to do something about it. I don't know if I'm articulating it all that well, but this is more personal than anything else, because I've seen a couple of friends go through that in networking who kind of missed the software-defined networking wave and then wondered, hey, how did they miss that? And then now I have a couple of friends who are like, should I be pivoting my career into AI now? And I think now is probably a bad time to pivot into AI. I think better to keep doing what you're doing, and then AI, watch very closely, because AI is going to sweep, as AI starts to sweep through your organization, get ready to catch that wave, get ready to catch it at that moment. Because you get to talk with a lot more people about this than I do. What do you see around this most recent wave with AI? I'm curious, what do you see with the way that different people manage their careers as it works its way through?
My situation is a little bit different, because I started to get interested in AI before this wave.
I would say you're actually one of the people that was in it before.
It's kind of interesting how I got here. 3 years ago, I started to hear people talking about how AI can solve problems in my industry. And then I started to become interested about them. And then I started to try to find where's the place I can learn. But at that time, there's not too much book about it. And then I try to ask people how I can learn and what I should know, but they're all busy. So I try to find a different way to learn about it. And actually, that's one of the reasons I started the podcast. But after a few months, I started to notice I was lucky to be that group of people start to learn AI through this wave, because I started before that, and then I learned it with all of those hype and all the waves. And now I'm kind of like accumulate a lot of information, co-author the book with other people, or like try to work on the standards for the industry on the AI side, right? But I think majority of my work will still stay in the old industry. But I'm willing to spend time to learn and invest with AI to see how that can make my work more efficient. And I also want to know where the innovation is and how I can help people to move the things forward. This is my position. I do see a lot of people, they're kind of like desperate to learn what's the best way to pivot to the AI industry, which make me think of the old dot-com wave, right? A lot of people try to do the dot-com and try to start the startup with the dot-com concept. But after 2000, right, a lot of companies died. A lot of people lost money from the market. So this is something maybe lesson to learn for the people who's thinking about that. Yeah.
Personally, I was in the NLP field for a little more, around 10 years before the ChatGPT come out, and we do like a very simple chatbot and recommendation systems before for mainly e-commerce sites and Shopify. Because I'm from Stanford, we did a lot of interviews and inner discussions for AI, for investors, for startups. Back in then, it was fighting for the foundation models, and later a lot of the to-be AI startup come out in a lot of verticals. So what people usually do is when they know the industry know-how so much and they have their standard operations, then they dig into the standard operations and try to find the AI roles that it can play to increase efficiency so that they can generate a business model. Back in the end of the last year and early this year, there was a lot of investment on this part. So it's what we observe from almost all the verticals. For consumer side, it's much more difficult. And also, when I have a podcast with you, I'm also very admire because then, as we know that when we talking about AI startups, the more closer to developers, more competitive it is. So because I interviewed like an AI engineer founder a couple of days ago, just a couple of days ago, she was founded by OpenAI. She was creating some tool to make the non-tech people to do coding. Basically, she was afraid of competing with the coding people. She's like a customer only to non-tech people. She don't want to compete with Cursor. So I think it's a very competitive area you are in. But we are also observing the reasoning models. Personally, I also do some kind of research on reasoning models. The reasoning model definitely can do automation more smartly. Automation is not like operations, but the thinking, planning, division, those kind of things could be the key. We tried out like previously cloud automations and random operator things, and it's amazing, but not perfect, obviously. But the most of engineers here in Silicon Valley think that by the end of this year, it could make a big difference for this part. So we are kind of looking forward to it. That's what we observe.
It's also, there's one interesting I want to share with you, right? Because I'm also involved in some investment ecosystem, right? You can see all those investors, they try to get into the AI area. You don't know how much they learned in a short time. I'm amazed that there was a period everyone tried to talk about the latest AI papers, just like they try to get a PhD within 3 months. You can tell when the AI wave starts. That's the time.
I kind of love that to me because I agree. This is the first wave that I've really seen, at least that I've been a part of, where academia is so present. Software-defined networking for me was a huge part of my life. It was really started by 4 universities. I was sitting in the Stanford research group that kind of, with Nick invented it. But fairly early on, it became a commercial thing, and the academic roots weren't really part of the ethos. But to your point, now when we have investors who are reading their early academic papers, and investors who are reading the latest academic papers in this area, as somebody whose career goal is to retire, become a professor, like that, I think that's really cool.
Let's do some more relaxed questions, I think. So far, what is the most interesting, innovative AI products you like, or you favor, or you use mostly?
Cursor AI has been, so far it's the winner, but this is an area, there's going to be a lot of churn. Across my team, whenever a new AI coding tool comes out, one person on the team will talk about it on Monday, and then by Wednesday, 2 or 3 people on the team, and by the end of the weekend, everybody will have an opinion. So right now, there's the current winner, and we go through a lot of them because, as I said, everybody on the team can expense when it comes to an AI coding tool. I'm very curious to try the new Copilot. Like, it's super competitive, and I just see how many we've tried and then loved, and then 2 months later, we've gone on to something new. I think these businesses I don't know that I see the economic mode in these businesses, but I love the products. I like products like ours, like our product. I think we kind of have this like first principles to say, hey, the engineering assistants should be competent, so they should do what you ask them to do. They should be creative. They should do 10% more than you ask them to do in creative ways, things that you never would have expected to ask. And they should anticipate 10% anticipation. So they should anticipate after they do something what you would ask next, and then try to do it. So competence, creativity, and anticipation. And I think that so far of the AI coding assistants, Cursor, I feel like, is the one that got that down the best, but there are going to be more.
Do you try AI tools to educate your kids or whatever in whatever format?
I gave my son an OpenAI API key for his 10th birthday with an unlimited budget. It wasn't that impactful.
So what trends and innovations in your field you see in the next 1 year or 5 years as the AI develops?
Yeah, I think it's fascinating that there are all these debates about, is the value in the core model, is the value in the thin wrapper around the core model? And who's right? And like every month somebody else is right. I guess for us, it's hard for me to, somebody asked me like RunWhen a thin wrapper around an AI model. I'm like, dude, we're almost 1 million lines of code in. If this is a thin wrapper, I think that there's room for a thick wrapper around an AI model. I think that that's what we're building. And I think that that's kind of where the competitive frontier is going to go. These products that you have some insight about some workflow that takes a lot of time, that's kind of inefficient in the industry, that you can make dramatically more efficient. And some of them will be thin wrappers, and others, like the neck of the woods that we're in, are very, very, very thick wrappers, and are kind of like the thick wrapper business. But excuse me.
I'm kind of like agree with you. Just think about at the beginning when internet happens, right? We can consider internet like the foundational model, right? And on top of internet, there are a lot of adoptions for different business cases. And later on, we have all sorts of different business models, applications. Maybe in the future, we can see the foundational model is like a new internet. On top of it, people will try to make different innovations, disruptions, or enablement. So this is something I'm excited about.
I like that analogy a lot, because I immediately think of like Amazon. Sure, maybe they started as a thin wrapper. It's a website. You buy a book, we ship you the book. But fairly early on, warehouses and distribution centers and trucks that were delivering into major metropolitan areas, that's a pretty thick wrapper. So like, I like that internet.
Do you have any books or suggestions regarding your area or something that inspire you for you can share to our audience?
Crossing the Chasm, not out of my whole stack of books that I've got over there. That's the one that I've bought the most copies for and given away. It's kind of a dark book, but I like it for a lot of people that are thinking about their career. Jeff Pfeffer's Paths to Power. He was a professor of mine, and it's a dark book, but it's like good stuff to know. Especially, I think I've had a lot of friends coming over from engineering over into management or over into other disciplines, and I find myself giving out that book a lot. For me, the most impactful book for me is still Tuesdays with Morrie. I love that book in many, many, many ways. I just think it's a beautifully written part of the canon. Those would be my 3.
What is the question you think we should ask, but we miss it?
Oh, that's a good question. I moved from Silicon Valley to here to London 18 months ago, and it gives me a very different perspective on Silicon Valley. And as I grew up there and spent most of my life there, and like now living outside and like looking in, I think the geographic differences, different countries, and even just different, let me just leave it at the geographic differences with respect to our views on what are the really interesting applications of these amazing new technologies. I'd be really, really interested what everybody would say, because I suspect that geography plays a bigger role than I ever gave credit for before when I was living in downtown San Francisco.
Is there anything you want to talk to our audience at the end?
Somebody on a podcast a couple months ago asked me, hey, could I give career advice to my former self? And so now when I've been interviewing people, I ask everybody that question. I would actually be curious to ask the question of both of you, like to answer it first. My answer to it is becoming a world expert in a niche. If as long as you pick your niche well, sometimes becoming the world expert only takes 3 or 4 months. And to your point of watching all these investors suddenly get up to speed, as long as you pick your niche very carefully, there are a lot of niches where you can become the world expert in 3 to 6 months. I think you can become the recognized expert for your organization in 3 to 6 months as well, as long as you pick your niche appropriately. Becoming the worldwide expert, recognized worldwide, that's a lot harder. That can take a couple of years very, very, very easily. And certainly if you pick a hard niche, it's going to take longer. But I think there are a lot of niches out there where you can become the worldwide expert in 3 to 6 months. And I think if I had recognized that even earlier in my career, then I would have spent more time trying to become the world's expert in a couple of niches. That would be my parting thought. But if you were going to give a career advice to your former self, what would it be?
I think for me, now, if I take that bigger responsibility, I'm willing to take that responsibility because I feel like as long as you're doing it and doing it in the right way, don't just think too much because you don't know where you will end, right? Maybe you can make a big impact or make things big. That's my takeaway. Yeah.
I'm right now doing an AI startup by myself besides the podcast. It's basically for marketing because of several reasons. Then I feel exciting because I also ask you about the sales. I'm doing sales before I do engineering. I do LM deployment, but I need to make Zoom calls with my clients whenever they are available, not I'm available. So it makes a huge difference. It's exciting. Then I learn a lot and need to manage more people. But another thing is that previously when I also did some startup work, let's say I do a technical company before making big data analysis. At that time, we were quite a lot of engineers hired. But right now, we tend to hire less and less people because we have AI. So in Silicon Valley, people company size shrinks a lot. So get more used to that. For example, before I need to make a proposal to a client, so I ask my designer to do it. But right now, I have to do it by myself. Cut the cost, but I have the several tools to do that. Show the illustrations, the graph scenes, even have a very bad idea of the designs. Yeah, get used to that. It kind of change also.